Hello everyone and welcome to another LDE webinar. Today we have David Abbey from MySafeHome as lead presenter, presenting No Holds Bar, everything you ever wanted to know about home ownership for people with long-term disabilities. Before we get started, let's review the practical issues of this session. On the right-hand side of the screen is your chat area. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please feel free to write them in this area. If you are joining us and find yourself in a noisy area, we ask that you please mute your profile to avoid background noises which may interfere with the presentation. Finally, it is important to note that this webinar is not endorsing Hold. This webinar is presented in the spirit of sharing information which we hope you will find very useful. And now I leave you with David Abbey and Hold.
Hi and welcome to the No Holds Barred webinar. I'm David Abbey, Director of MySafeHome. The start of the webinar today is a question and answer session, and today I have four co-presenters. So the first presenter is Hannah Addy, who's a homeowner for over 4 years now. Second presenter is Ian Henderson, father of Gail, and Gail's been a homeowner for over 16 years. We then have Tina Cooper, mother of James, and James has been a homeowner for over 10 years. And finally, Graham Jackson, head of investment and development at Advanced Housing, who have helped over 600 people become homeowners since 1997. Before we get into the first question, it's important to say that Hold, home ownership for people with long-term disabilities, is just one of a range of housing options, and people should consider all their options when looking at housing. So to this end, please visit the Learning Disability England website, and under the resources section, you'll find some really useful information, such as Life Begins at Home and 8 ways to get a house. Hold is just one of the 8 ways to get a house, but it won't be right for everybody with a learning disability. So let's start with question 1. And this is being sent in from Dean Lister, Commissioning Officer at Calderdale, Adult Social Service and Wellbeing. And the question is, £17,000 for a deposit and fees is a large amount of money for people. So how have those who have initially struggled to find a deposit overcome this? I'd probably suggest that Graham at Advanced Housing, perhaps you'd answer this one for us, Graham.
Great. So yes, we are asked this question when we go out to explain how Hold works, and people have found quite innovative ways, but some of the ways people have gone to the bank of mum and dad. So families, relatives have helped out. Some people do have a fair amount of saving in their own name, so in their own bank account. People have gone to discretionary trusts that families might hold, or in fact general trusts as well. There are trusts out there that people have been able to get some money from. Charitable organisations who fundraise, you can always try to find those on the internet in your local area. Department of Health, through various grant funding in the past, they've been able to offer certainly the deposit and some of the fees to people through the local authority. Local authorities themselves have helped out, and also clinical commissioning groups have found ways of being able to offer, again, deposits mainly, but sometimes deposits and fees. So there are certainly different ways of overcoming that if people don't have the money in their own bank account.
Thanks for that, Graham. And I'd add to that, we're working with a couple of cases currently where there's been mistakes made by benefit offices and DWP, etc. And we've had a couple of people who've actually received substantial back payments for some of those errors. One individual's actually had £14,000 just hit their bank account because of those situations. And as people know, they then have about a year to spend this money before it counts against them in terms of benefits, etc. So those are some of the ways that people have used to find those funds. So moving on to question 2, also from Dean Lister, the Commissioner from Caldersdale. Are you able to give any examples of where a local authority granted or funded the money to an individual on the basis of invest to save? And if so, has this been a straightforward process, or does it bring in other layers of complexity? And Graham, I'm going to send that one across to you again.
Oh, thanks, Dave. So yes, we are aware, and we have worked with local authorities where they've either used their own funds in this investor save model, so they've been able to offer capital, which the individual's been able to use to either put towards the deposit, or in some cases they've used some of that to again fund the fees. Sometimes local authorities are able to draw on funds from third parties. So again, Department of Health, they've had various grant fund opportunities for people to bid into. So yes, there are definitely local authorities. Is it straightforward? It's certainly not complex. There's an extra layer that it does bring, and that's often because, quite rightly, local authorities want to protect the investment that they've made, and they can do that by bringing in what's called a legal charge onto usually the shared owner's leasehold share. But again, sometimes local authorities have offered grant funding capital to us as a housing association and also other housing associations, and then they can protect their share by a legal charge again against the freehold of the property. So definitely can be done. Just need to make sure that everybody is aware. And in fact, there's one example where somewhere in the Berkshire area, there was a local authority who already did this for general needs shared ownership. So they were able to offer funding for people going through general needs shared ownership, and then people going through the whole scheme, and that they paid the 5% as it was then deposit, which they put as a legal charge. So yeah, definitely can be done, and we can certainly talk local authorities through how to do that.
Thank you, Graham. And in terms of local authorities that have done this, Graham mentioned Berkshire there. I can think of people like Nottinghamshire who have just done it. Hertfordshire have got a scheme that they're rolling out at the moment, and Swindon have done it. Wiltshire have done it in the past as well. So there's a number of examples there of local authorities using invest to save, and yes, it's a great opportunity in terms of invest to save, but also more importantly, it improves the lives of people with disabilities and encourages integration to the wider community. So it covers that angle as well. So moving on to question 3. Why would someone with a disability want to buy a home of their own using Hold? And the second part of the question, what difference does it really make to their lives? And I'd like to ask Hannah, one of our homeowners, who's been supported by Sarah today, to answer that question.
Hi, good morning.
Hello, I'm Hannah Louise Addy.
Hannah bought her home 4 years ago. And Hannah, why did you buy your home? What did it make you feel? And how did it make you feel?
When I had my first home, I lived in 4 years. It was a new experience for me. It was my own first start in life. I became more independent, doing food shopping and paying bills and etc. Really. So
that's brilliant. Thanks a lot, Hannah, and thanks for your support there, Sarah, as well. That was really useful. I think I'd like to bring in Ian Henderson as well on this question. I know Ian's a parent, is the parent of Gail, who bought her own home over 16 years ago. Would you like to see if you could answer that for us, Ian, on behalf of Gail, please?
Yes, good morning. Yesterday was World Down Syndrome Day. Gail has Down syndrome and lives with 2 other people with Down syndrome, and if you want to see a photograph of her, Advance have tweeted a photograph today of Gail in her own home. It's made a huge difference to her. She's much more independent than she was when she lived at home with us. We would do everything for her. She would have cups of tea made for her at home because we would never trust her with a boiling kettle. She wouldn't peel potatoes, she wouldn't prepare vegetables. Now she can do all these things. She takes charge of the other 2 in a way, she mothers them. And we keep telling her you've got to provide support to the care people who look after her 24/7 as well. She loves it. You think as a parent maybe sometimes they might be sad to leave our home and go back to her own home because she only lives a few hundred yards away. But every time in the last 16 years she goes back, she's always huge smiles when she goes back into her own home. We take her on holiday, but she's always keen to go back in. It's her place. It's not a house, it's a home. And she absolutely adores living there. And we have peace of mind that it's there for life. Gail will be in that house for the rest of her life. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Really, really useful. Thanks for that. And I think I'd like to bring Tina in as well at this juncture. And Tina is mother of James, and James has been in his own home for about 10 years. So, Tina, could you answer that question on behalf of James or from your perspective, please?
Of course. I was getting older. We as a family were not struggling to cope, but thinking forward. And because James has profound and multiple learning disabilities, severe physical disabilities and complex health needs, we didn't think it would be possible. It was. James has been there 10.5 years, and he is thriving. It's his home. He has a group of support workers that support him, and he is an independent young man from mum and dad. He has the time of his life. He is accepted in his community for who he is. When he first moved into his property, he was known as the young man in the wheelchair. Now he's known as young James, which for me as a mom makes me feel so happy. I didn't think it would work. I didn't think he could do it. He did. We did. And boy, is he having a life. He does so many things. He's got a better social life than me. He has thrived. He's happy, and I can't wish for any more.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Tina. Really, really good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to move on to question number 4 now. And it's from a chap called Ian Penfold. And Ian asks, I understand that holds capped at £100,000. As a result, it may be impossible to find an affordable property in your area of origin, which means moving a long way away from your community and family and friends. Is it therefore a flawed scheme? So perhaps I can take this one. So in terms of the model, we know it's part buy, part rent. And what I think Ian's referring to here is the mortgage that we're able to arrange for people who have got long-term disabilities and have only got state disability benefits to live on. And that's capped at £100,000. So how does that work for properties that are based in expensive areas of the country? So in terms of the model, let's just have a look at the typical budget for a property. You typically have a £100,000 mortgage, about 10%, £10,000 deposit from the family, and the housing association's part of the property, which is rented to our homeowner, there's about £100,000 in that portion as well. So that gives you a total figure of about £210,000. Now, families can put more deposit into the purchase. So if a family put in an extra £40,000, they could then in fact buy a property for £250,000. So that still might not be enough in terms of getting a property in an area that is required. The big exception to this, before I answer the question, the big exception to this is we do work in London. And as you know, London property prices are very, very expensive. And typically a 2-bedroom property in London will cost us will be valued at in excess of £500,000. With that example, because the property has been built by a housing association on shared ownership, the percentage share that can be purchased can be as low as 25%. So in that example, a share of that property could be purchased for £125,000. So it still requires the bank of mum and dad typically to find the £25,000 deposit on top of the £100,000 mortgage. So that's one way of accessing properties. But those are shared ownership properties already built by a housing association. The big barrier that prevents us offering mortgages of more than £100,000 today is it's all around the element of affordability for the applicant. So our applicants, when they move into their own properties with a £100,000 mortgage, will typically have to pay about £130 a month housing costs towards their home. If that mortgage was £200,000, that typically would be closer to £200 a month towards their housing costs, and that might be unaffordable for some people without relying on the bank of mum and dad, as the bank of mum and dad might not always be there. So that's one of the limitations. We could see in the future, if banks and building societies are more sympathetic to the needs of people with disabilities and the hold model, where their top up towards their mortgage is a lot less, and therefore we could consider mortgages higher than £100,000. But today, it's at that level for that reason predominantly. But in saying that, I still would say that hold is not a flawed scheme. Absolutely not. After audit tables, many people actually move close to friends and family, and today we know that the cost of housing is a real problem, not just for people with disabilities, but for everybody. Not everybody can afford to live in an area where they want to live. So, as I say, I don't think it's a flawed scheme, but there are limitations. Graham, can you help us out on this one in terms of any flexibility or influence to bear in terms of the rented part of the property, where I said that perhaps £100,000 could be invested?
So I agree. I think property prices in some areas are very, very high, which does have an impact on the kind of property that's affordable if you just looked at those figures that David's explained. The element that the Housing Association puts in is often made up of Homes England grant. Homes England are the part of the government that fund affordable housing. And we're able to access grant that we bid for. So typically that's a range of grant depending on which area you're in. So if we're working in very expensive areas, we can sometimes go back and ask Homes England to increase the grant that we can use in that area. As a housing association, we also, when we sell properties, we're able to hold on to some of that grant that's in the property and put it into a fund. And again, we can ask Homes England if we can use that money as well to increase the overall grant that we have in a property. We've also been able to work with local authorities who have given some capital grant. So again, that just keeps adding to the amount we can buy. The amount that we can afford to buy as a property. But ultimately there is a limit, and sometimes we can't afford to buy the right property. because of the market in that area at that point in time. But there are ways of, as David explained in London, there are ways in other parts of the country that you can work with other local housing associations to try to find properties that might suit somebody's needs, that are new build properties or that are already shared ownership and are being offered for resale. Sometimes that doesn't work because people need to have a property in a very specific area and a specific type. But we'd certainly try to be as flexible as possible, but knowing that there are limitations on our funds as well as the shared owners funds. Is that okay, David? Does that sort of explain a bit more?
That's yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks a lot for that. Moving on to question 5, again from Ian Penfold. And the question from Ian this time is, what happens for those who can't manage their own paperwork, benefits, maintenance and staffing? I'd like to ask Tina to help us out on this question. Tina.
Okay, no problems. I'll give you a bit of background first. James is a quadriplegic cerebral palsy with profound and multiple learning disabilities, severe physical disabilities and complex health needs. He has no verbal communication and is just James. We looked at James moving out of home. We looked at lots of different things. We were introduced to Graham Jackson from Advanced Housing. We were introduced to David Abbey from MySafeHomes, who explained that even though James does not have the mental capacity, could share own his own property and it would be his. He could have a mortgage, and we didn't believe it. So we looked into what they said. Yes, it was. Yes, we could. Can we? We spoke with James to see how he would feel about living in his own home, buying his own home, having a mortgage. It sounded not right. It sounded wrong. So we did some in-depth investigation. Yes, it could be done. We could go to the Court of Protection to arrange for James in his name to have a mortgage, for him to share own and buy his part of the property, for me to become his receiver to do that on his behalf. It's not in my name, it's in his name. We went to the Department of Work and Pensions because at the time I was his full-time carer, and all the benefits would go to him, not to me. We claimed for housing benefit to enable him to pay his rent to Advanced Housing, and it worked. We didn't believe it. We thought, no, this isn't, but it did. We found the property to suit James's needs, not our needs. He moved approximately 12 miles away from home. We involved him along the way, and it was good for him and us. When someone says to you, Court of Protection, you panic. Ooh, what do you do? It's a 40-page leaflet that you fill in. What you have to remember, okay, James has some things, but he doesn't have a lot. He's a young man who lives on benefits. He doesn't have to pay the Court of Protection for me to become his receiver because he has no assets until he buys the property. The support I got from both Advanced Housing and MySafeHomes was brilliant. We couldn't have done it without their help. James has lived in his own home now for 10.5 years. He's an independent young man who has thrived. He's happy, he's accepted in his community, and he loves his home. That's him trying to dust, but it's not good. He's changed. 10 years have changed him. I'm 10 years older and getting older. I'm tired, but he's still full of life. He still wants to have a life. I haven't got the energy to do that, and that's why we did this. James has a group of support workers that are with him 24/7. He goes out every single day of his life, whether it be on holiday to climb a mountain, to play archery, to go in a canoe in the middle of a lake, to go down a zip wire on his own, which he loved, so he did it again, to go dancing with Hawaiian girls, or to go in his local pub and have a beer. He's a 36-year-old man who is out there in his community and accepted for who he is. I, as a mum, didn't think it could happen. I had visions of James being, I don't know where, and I didn't want him there, wherever it was. But where he is now, he is in a fabulous place. I still worry. That never goes away as a mum. That stays with you forever. I just know that when I see him and when he sees me, his eyes light up, he smiles, he's happy, he's doing things. If you look at his social diary, it's better than mine. That's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. I didn't think it was possible. I thought it was a dream. And most mornings I wake up and pinch myself and think, yes, James is still living in his own home. No one can take it off him. He's the majority shareholder. He's paying his mortgage. He had his care. He's having a great life. And I couldn't wish for more.
Thank you for that, Tina. We'll help us put the mic on. So, Ian, I was just going to ask you, in terms of Gail, does Gail do her own paperwork and staffing and the maintenance and all that, or does she get help with it?
Absolutely not. No, can I just say before that, Tina, you've just absolutely knocked the nail on the head. Everything you said it was superb. That's exactly where we are as well.
Brilliant.
No, Gail doesn't do any of that. Her mum's her appointee. Gail would never be able to cope with any of that at all. It could be a problem in the future when her mum and dad are no longer on this planet, but she's got two brothers. They've got busy lives as well. There's a thing that Oxfordshire County Council got called money management, which we might have to consider at some stage in the future. We put our head in the sand at this time over these sort of things. There's a lot going on. So, but no, Gail gets all the support that she needs from her mum and dad. I quite like a pen and paper. I'm quite good with that sort of thing. So I get a kind of sadistic pleasure out of dealing with the Department of Work and Pensions, Oxfordshire County Council, Kent Reliance Building Society, and it keeps me off the street.
Ian, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's Tina here. I sit with James and do his paperwork with him. I don't know what he understands. He can't tell me. But it's his information. It's about him. It's his house. He looks at me sometimes when I get a bit cross on the phone with people, but we get there. And it's his. It's about him. It's his life, his home. You know, that's what it is.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you both for that, and really, really useful again. I'd like to move on to question 6 now, which is it's anonymous. There's no name attached to this one. Is it possible for several people to purchase and share a property together using hold? And if so, what happens when one of them wants to move out? I'd like to address this question to Ian.
Thank you, David. Just again, a bit of background. Gail moved into her property in 2003, and she shared it with 2 other Down syndrome people. Graham at Advance, David at MySafeHome. They covered all the mortgage arrangements. Did all the negotiations with estate agents in order to purchase the house. From memory, and it's a long time ago, I think we actually bought the house without viewing it, which I was really quite proud of at the time, not being a shopper. The process was straightforward, easy. I have to confess that, like David, I spent my working life in financial services, so I had a rough idea of what was going on. They moved in, the care was provided. Then in October 2006, one of the chaps who was in there, I got a phone call one morning from a local authority care manager to say that he was leaving. It's difficult to separate the mortgage side from the care side. The mortgage side I always found relatively straightforward. I kept told the other two families what was happening, kept them up to date. The two were intermingled, the care package and the mortgage, where it was difficult to separate them. It was a question of, this wasn't a great situation to be in, and you had to close sort of one door, sort of one box with the mortgage in it, and open the one with the care package in it, and then keep switching them around so you could keep your sanity at the time. But it wasn't an easy time. To talk about the mortgage, because the person had left immediately, the interest to the Kent Reliance Building Society wasn't being paid, so there was arrears being built up. So we told the Building Society, and they were relaxed about that, as long as we kept them up to date. I think if you think of it in terms of a divorce or a separation of partners, it was the same as that. Didn't quite so much baggage with it, but it was along the same sort of lines. There was 3 options. Advance would buy the leaver share. Gail and Paul could buy the leaver share. Paul was the other chap who was living there at the time. Or we could sell to a new housemate. I've looked through my notes for the webinar, and my reaction to buying, there was another option actually, which was to sell and buy a 3-bedroom house rather than have the 4-bedroom house. And my notes say that my comment to that was over my dead body. Gail and Paul, her co-owner, were really happy where they were. They weren't disturbed by this. So I didn't want that to happen. If I then move on to the care side, we had to wait for the local authority to nominate a 3rd person to fill the vacancy. But it was always going to be Gail and Paul's decision as to who was to live with them. They must be compatible. The local authority did not have a vacancy. It wasn't their vacancy. It was Gail and Paul's. The local authority never really took this on board, however, and I think we went through 5 applicants. Some were just totally, when their families saw the situation that Gail and Paul were in, they said there's no way that they wanted their son, daughter to live there. It wasn't appropriate. Gail and Paul are loving, quiet, childlike, I should say, not politically correct to say that. Gail's now 38, Paul's 47. They're just loving people. Some people that were put in were quite happy to go down the pub, getting home at 11, 12 o'clock at night. One was 6 foot, another one was sectioned. It was just inappropriate. And we did know someone, actually, another family, who were in crisis at the time, or approaching crisis. And we told the local authority this, but we were told, no, that person doesn't fit the criteria. So, well, the other problem at the time was the care package might be reduced, because instead of 3 people living there, there was only 2. That was more stressful than the mortgage. So that took us through 2007, where all these people were coming and going. Finally, though, in 2008, at the very beginning of 2008, Oxfordshire County Council told us that they had a person, and lo and behold, it was the one that we told them about a year before that didn't fit the criteria. The paperwork was completed. This person moved in on a trial basis and came for dinner, tea, met the other 2, but she knew the other 2 anyway. And then finally, in August of that year, she moved in. Going back to the mortgage side of things, the arrears had built up, the rent had built up. The chap who'd left, his family were using solicitors, obviously, and they sort of wanted the money. So what happened was the house was purchased at £185,000 in 2002 and valued at £250,000 in 2008. As I said earlier, I quite enjoyed pen and paper and numbers. So a little bit of numbers. Gail, Paul and the chap who left, they had 18% each of the property. Advanced on the other 56%. So we worked out, or Advanced and our solicitors worked out that the equity left in the property was about just over £10,000. From the £10,000, the rent arrears were paid to Advanced, and the mortgage arrears of about £1,300 were paid to the Kent Reliance Building Society, and the leaver received £5,300. The new person moving in had to pay a very small deposit, I think almost £1,000, maybe just over, and she has a 14% portion of the property. So Advance have got slightly more than that now. Sorry if that's so complicated, but the bottom line is in this, it is possible for several people to own. It works well if they're all compatible. It's their property, it's not anyone else's. I have this utopian dream that this property will always be there and forever for people with learning disabilities. We deal with a lot of political correctness nowadays. People don't like to talk about death and things, but if my daughter were to die, then I would want peace and quiet for the other two families that were being there, and just gently move the property, her share of the property, over to someone else, and they would move in, and that property would be forever and a day the home of 3 people with learning disabilities. It's been quite a journey, but to see a face and to see the house and the way it's run, it's all just wonderful. There's another part that fills me with glee. I've mentioned a few times that it was their decision as to who lives there. I have heard stories of local authorities saying to someone who's in a joint tenancy, well, actually, you're quite good. I think you should leave here and go and live on your own somewhere else. They reduce the costs and they put someone with more disabilities into that property. Because my Gail owns the property, there's nobody can move her. She's an owner-occupier. It's her house. She's got security for a lifetime. I can't think of many disadvantages to it. One difficulty has been on occasions that there's a lot of people that we have to deal with, a lot of agencies that just don't understand how good this is and scratch their heads. But it's, we try to educate them. It does get tiring at times. But with the support of David and the support of Graham, we've got there. Sorry to go on, David. You know that I do talk far too much.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks for that, Ian. Really do appreciate it.
Can I just interrupt a moment?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry,
sure.
Tina.
Go on, carry on, Tina.
Sorry, can I just interrupt a moment? Ian, brilliant, well done. Gail's happy. That's important. You're happy. Your wife's happy. It makes us feel good, doesn't it?
It certainly does. But it's a lifelong thing. It'll never end. I met yesterday with another family who David and Graham are trying to assist, and it's a struggle to start with. The mortgage side of things, the things that David and Graham get involved in, it's relatively easy-ish.
Yeah,
it's
agreed.
It's the care package. That's the thing that I find in where we live the difficulty. How the carers are wonderful, how they do that job for the amount of money and the hours they do. I couldn't do the job. It's the bit above that, the management, the funding. It all comes down to money at the end of the day. It's always money. And I can understand that local authorities are stretched, and central government are giving them less of it. And there's wonderful stories that you laugh that they're so crazy on occasions. We can talk about support for mortgage interest relief and the crazy world of that.
We're not going there. We're not going there. We've done that.
It's fun.
Again, with help though, it's about networking. It's about finding out what other people have done and passing that on. Because nobody believes that my son, for all his problems, has got a mortgage, is a shared owner in a property with a housing association. They look at me as if I'm talking double Dutch. But once you explain it and how it's done, they think, oh, we could do that.
And I think also it must be cheaper. I'm no expert in this, but it must be cheaper for local authorities to have Gail and James in their own property than the other alternatives that are available to them. It's they're coming. They're trying to reduce the amount of time they're spending in this. It's to their advantage that this scheme's there.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. Remember, they don't have the on costs to pay, do they? Gail and James pay them.
Yeah. All that, well, not all they've got, but they've got to provide a budget or direct payments or whatever route you go down. But it has to be a lot cheaper for them than the cost that they would be incurring 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago.
Exactly.
I think. Not sure, but I think that's my view. Sorry if there's any local authorities listening.
Sorry, but Gail and James are having a life.
Yeah.
And it's the life they want, aren't they?
Yeah. No institutions.
No institutions. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Tina.
Thanks for that. And just to add a little piece to that, really. Of the over 1,300 people we've helped to become homeowners over the last 20 years or so, we've only got 3 groups of 3 people living in a 4-bedroom house, and so and that's not something that we've done in terms of making that work. That's the group of families and the individuals knowing that the people who are going to be homeowners can actually live together. Because if they can't, you're going to have an issue with stability. And it's interesting, over 16 years of Gail living in her own property, they've only had 1 change. And the point there really is, it's really around, if people aren't compatible, you've got more chance of that, if you like, that arrangement breaking down, or at least coming under stress. So it's important that it's the individuals who choose to live with each other, rather than the local authorities putting them all together because they have a disability. So thank you for that. I'd like to just take the opportunity to answer a few of the questions that have come through online whilst we've been on the webinar, and again I'll just pass this out to different people to answer. So there's the first question here is from Sarah Truman. What happens when parents are not alive to manage the paperwork?
Right. This is something we've looked into. You can have an advocate who will do it for you, if that's what you want to do, a brother or a sister, or it can be done through a solicitor. We're looking through that at the moment because of getting older and what have you, and what will happen. We have set a trust up from our will and so forth and so on, but it's something we are digging deeper into now as we're getting older.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Tina. And would you agree with that, Ian? Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. Again, I said earlier on, we're sort of putting our head in the sand on this, but speaking to other families, they're looking at trusts. We've got wills made. No secret. I've said to Gail's 2 brothers, you're getting, if there's anything left after your father's finished up in a care home for 100 years, then if there's anything left at all, you two are having it split between you, but you're actually going to have to look after Gail as well, and there won't be a problem with that. They'll make sure she's okay. They've got busy lives, paperwork. We'll need to try and teach them, but it's not too onerous. The paperwork's not too onerous at all. It comes back to the care again. It's the paperwork's relatively straightforward. It's making sure that the care package that's in place is adequate.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. And talking about care package, there was a question that came in late yesterday, and it's anonymous. And the question is, how do I get care and support for my son to live independently in his own home when the local authorities only suggesting a group home? Tina,
can we leave the room now, David?
Tina, can I ask you to address that one? Any
Yes,
suggestions?
Their son needs an assessment of his needs, and you work out a care plan from those assessments. And if it's near to where so I'm trying to think how we did it. James was in the band of critical and substantial, and needed the support. It isn't what the local authority suggests, it's what you can suggest to the local authority, surely. If you want your son or daughter to share their own property with a mortgage, surely they get in touch with yourselves and with Advanced Housing and move it forward that way. We went to the local authority and said, this is what we would like to do for James, with James, and they said, okay.
Sorry, yeah, Ian, can you come in? Thanks.
We had to go through a tendering process about 7-8 years ago for the care package, and with 3 living in the property, we were asked, well, actually, as a local authority, we would much prefer that there were 4 in the property. Could you be constructive and maybe build an extension? Obviously, the answer to that was no. But again, the family I met yesterday, their problem is that their daughter will not wish to live with anyone else, can't live with anyone else. And it is a real problem that local authorities appear to want to have 3-4 people sharing when it's not appropriate for everyone. But I do think that it's rough on the families, because I think if they know the law and know what their entitlements are, then they stand a far better chance than just being given a flat rejection by the local authority. But it's difficult to know what the law and what their entitlements are and how to find out what they are. And to try and, when you are told no, that won't happen, to fight when you really are quite exhausted by the whole situation anyway.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian. And just over to you, Graham, in terms of how people might find out how the Care Act can support them and advocacy, etc. What would your advice, guidance be to family members who are struggling with this?
Ooh, on the spot. It's difficult, but I think, as Ian and Tina have said, I think it's just presenting to the local authority what the best for their relatives are, or is. And often that isn't necessarily sharing unless you know the people very well. And it is difficult for local authorities, but people do have entitlements and rights, and there obviously is the Care Act that enshrines that. So it is just keeping going, but as Ian said, that is tiring as well. And as I said before, the housing, the mortgage side is probably relatively easy. It is making sure that the care is both paid for and is at the right level and by the right provider.
Thank you for that, Graham. I think that's useful. Moving on to another question that came in whilst the webinar's been on, is from a lady called Emily Payne. And as a care provider, some of the housing associations we work with have considered using shared ownership, Can you offer examples of times when this has worked well? I'm going to pass that over to you, Graham, again. Sorry about this.
No, of course. I think every time we work with somebody into owning their own home through shared ownership, if that person requires support, then we would say it works well. I suppose it goes back to the previous question about if somebody has a package of support, or if they're able to get the local authority to agree that support around them, then again, working with the housing association, they're completely separate. So dealing with the housing, as long as the housing association is able to and willing to provide shared ownership for them, and they qualify through the criteria for that, then I think the question came from a care agency, then they should be able to work with the individual and provide that support no matter where they live. So working with a housing association to buy a shared ownership property, again, the care and support and housing are completely separate. So as long as the housing association is willing to work with the individual applicant into shared ownership, then it will work well, as long as the care provider is providing the right level and quality of care.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the question as well, Emily. Do appreciate it. Another one that came in late last night, and the lady didn't want her name mentioned, so it's anonymous. We've set up a discretionary trust for my autistic son, enabling him to purchase 75% of the property using hold. Who would then be the legal owner of his home? Who would then be the legal owner of his home? Are there any problems using trust money to buy a home through hold? Graham, I'm going to address this one again to you.
Off the top of my head, no, because the trust would be granting or giving the money to the individual to buy their home. That can then be, there can be a legal charge put in it so that the money goes back to the discretionary trust. We can't work with a trust, so we'd have to work with the individual. But that shouldn't matter, as long as the trust get the money back through the legal charge when the property is sold. If they can afford to buy 75% of the property, then it cuts out needing a mortgage, which simplifies things. Who would be the legal owner? Exactly the same as any other shared ownership through hold. The housing association would be if it's a freehold property, would be the freehold owner. They'd create what's called a leasehold interest through the shared ownership lease. That would be a separate title. That would be the bit that the individual would own a share of. And it would just operate in exactly the same way. When the property came to be sold, it would be divided up in the same way, but with the legal charge on the leasehold interest, that discretionary trust money would go back to the discretionary trust. I think that sort of sums it. I'm happy to, if the person who put the question forward wants to come directly to us, I'm happy to think about it further, but that's how we've done them before, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Graham. And I've got two questions that are linked together here. And again, it's going to be another one for you, Graham. So the first question is from Holly. Who has responsibility for the maintenance and repairs? Is it shared between the owner and the housing association? So that's one question. And there's a second question from David, and it's the housing association, as there is a service charge. Oh, this can be paid, right? So actually, David is answering Holly's question. Can you just clarify who's got the responsibility, Graham, and is it shared between the owner and the housing association?
So the responsibilities, liabilities will be detailed in the lease, usually through hold. It's the responsibility of the landlord to do the repairs, but for that they charge a service charge, as David has said, and therefore that is the bit that is paid by housing benefit or universal credit. So the responsibility lies with the housing association, but they will charge for those repairs through the service charge account, which is a set amount that's charged weekly, monthly, annually, and that builds up a fund, and the money is taken from there to do the repairs. There are legal protections around what can and can't be done. So the housing association doesn't actually pay for any of the costs, because it's claimed back through the service charge account, like any other leasehold maintenance would be done if you were owning a property outright through leasehold.
Thank you very much. That's great, Paris. That's fantastic. And I'm going to put Ian and Tina on the spot with this one. How have you found the repair and maintenance elements of the home ownership program, considering Gail's been over 16 years and James has been over 10 years? If you could just give some insight into that.
Can I go first, Ian?
Yeah, on you go, Tina.
Okay. All I can say, absolutely brilliant. To put it in layman's terms, all we have to do is keep the decorating up. Everything else is covered, from the boiler service to painting the outside fence if we wish them to, things like that, the roof, all that sort of thing. We had a flood in the property a few years ago. Because we pay to the shared ownership advanced housing a certain amount of money for buildings insurance, that was all covered. No problems. We just got to buy a pot of paint occasionally and keep the inside of the house up.
Thank you. Ian?
In the 16 years, we had the kitchen totally gutted, refurbished, and approached Advance, and the cost for that was shared 50-50. Again, as Tina says, we do the decorating. The carers that are there, they have an emergency number if anything goes wrong, or just for routine things, and they'll get in touch with Leicester Advance, and they'll send out a contractor to do whatever work needs to be done.
Okay. Brilliant, thank you for that. And I've got an earlier question that I missed actually, so I'll just go back to it. It's from David, and the question is, how does a married couple apply for hold where one of them has a disability? I'm probably best placed to answer this question. So where we've got a married couple where one has a long-term disability, we've been able to arrange probably about 8 or 9 of these types of mortgages. So it's a joint mortgage between husband and wife on the property, with the property. And in the event of let's imagine it's the husband who has a disability. So in the event of the husband passing away, the wife will be left with a property with a mortgage. And if they have the ability to work, then they need to find work to pay for the mortgage, but they'll get some grace to enable them to do that. And that's around a year or so. So that's the thing that you need to be aware of, is in the event of the person with disability passed away, there's still a mortgage available, still to be paid, but by somebody who probably has to go to work to pay it. So that's the first one. And the second thing to be aware of, if the person who doesn't have a disability passes away, then the mortgage can still continue in single names in the name of the person with a disability, with the benefits paying the mortgage, etc. So it is possible, just need to be careful how it's set up and need to be aware of the pitfalls in the event of somebody passing away. And I think that's most of the questions that have come through that we've been able to answer. So has anybody else come through with a question at all, Mariana? Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Hi, David. Thank you so much. I think you've covered all the questions we have. What I just wanted to say is I just wanted to thank everyone for taking their time to share their experience and knowledge with us. It really has been an excellent session. I wanted to ensure we had some problems with the sound. Some people weren't receiving it. So I wanted to just let everybody know that we have recorded this session. The sound has come through without a problem on this end. So hopefully the recording will be very good. And I also wanted to thank Thank you and everyone for participating, and hope you join us again in another session very soon.
Yes, thank you for that, Marion. Can I just finish by saying, if there are any other questions, then please send them through to Marion at Learn Disability England, or to myself. And you've got our details there on the first slide. And just again, like to just send thanks out to Hannah, Tina, Ian, and Graham for all your help today. You did all the real work, so many thanks for that. And to anybody who's listening, who's on this call, if you're interested in exploring hold in any shape or form, please email myself, David Abbey at MySafeHome.info, and again the details on that first slide. And as I say, come through with questions to ourselves or LDE if you've got any that we haven't been able to pick up today. So leaves me to say thank you very much, and have a great day, everybody.